opening your Bibles to the 7th chapter of the book of Daniel. I think unless you've read this chapter beforehand, before coming to class, which is something I always ask you to do for the coming classes, if you haven't read this, you really couldn't answer some of the more fundamental questions. So we'll read the chapter first, and then I'll ask the questions, and you should be able to answer that. This is one of those chapters where, if you don't like history, sit still and be real quiet, because this is a lot of history here. So you're going to have to. We're going to test both your Bible knowledge and your history knowledge this morning. This is one of those. This is one of those types of chapters. All right, Daniel 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up a great sea. And four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth, and it was told, Arise and devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful, exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, its wheels burning with fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. And as I looked, the beast was killed, its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like unto the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and kingdoms, and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all of this. And so he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Then I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, the horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it into pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and he shall put down those 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed by the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. So for those of you who've been here for all of the chapters preceding this, what's different? What's different about this chapter? What's different about this chapter?
It's mainly prophecy.
Okay.
And it's not given to Daniel's situation with the kings, the other kings.
Okay. So the comparative that you could make to this chapter in chapter 7 is you could make a comparative to chapter 2, where we saw the great statue that Nebuchadnezzar talked about, right? So some of that goes along with this. But if you think about chapters 1 through 7, remembering that chapter 2 through chapter 7 are written in Aramaic, which is the language of diplomacy, so that more peoples could read and understand that. It's a narrative. It tells about specific things that happened, specific things that were done. It tells the story in a more or less chronological nature. But now to his point, now things have changed. This is no longer a narrative. This is now prophecy and interpretation. And you're going to see that. So chapters 1 through 7, or 1 through 6 are narrative in nature. They tell history. And then chapters 7 through 12, to the end of the book, now is going to be all in prophecy and interpretation of the prophecy. So looking at this in comparison to chapter 2, just right off the top, if you remember chapter 2, that was the head of gold and the chest of silver and so on down to the feet made of bronze, or made of clay and iron. Chapter 7 has many more human figures in it than did just the one statue of chapter 2. Okay, so that's a difference. The other thing is that in this chapter, the individuals that are discussed here in various forms are much more cruel. This is not just a description of this statue. It's a description, but it goes into much more detail. Okay, so in this chapter, in chapter 7, we're verses 1 through 4, about 1 through 14 is going to be the revelation of the vision, okay? And within that revelation of the vision, in verses 1 through 8, we're going to talk about the 4 beasts. And then in chapter 7, 9 through 14, you're going to look at the vision of the Ancient of Days, okay? So who is the Ancient? Just looking at some of this, just right off the top, who is the Ancient of Days? That's God. He's described here. Then there's one that looks as the Son of Man. Who is that? That's Christ. Christ is referred to as the Son of Man. He referred to himself as the Son of Man in Luke. He said the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. And so even Christ refers to himself as the Son of Man. So we have those two characters. And so those two characters are fairly easy to get to, or easy to get through. The interpretation of some of the others are the ones that we'll spend the majority of our time on. So let's look at the chapter verse by verse, and we'll go through this. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. So this is now hearkening back to prior to chapter 6, where Belshazzar is it's his last night on earth, because he dies at the end of the chapter, and the Medo-Persian Empire, remember, is right outside the gates ready to take the city. So this is sometime much prior to this. So we're looking back in the first year of Belshazzar's reign as king of Babylon. And so Daniel has a dream. The time of the dream, the visions in his head were as he was laying in his bed. And he wrote down the dream and told us and told the sum of the matter. And that's what constitutes this chapter. And there are times when you want to remember a dream that you wrote down. Sometimes I would keep a pad and pencil by the bed. And if I woke up in the middle of the night and had a dream, I wouldn't remember it when I got up the next morning. But if I wrote it down, I would remember it. And so that's something that people do. So Daniel says that I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. All right? So let's get these unwound, and let's talk about this. In the Bible, what does a great sea often refer to? Okay. A great sea can be the earth, it can be a people, and it can be nations. So it can be any one of those three. So if you look in Jeremiah 46, if you look in Isaiah 8, if you look in Revelation 13, the great sea refers to a people or a land or nations. And so the great sea, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Okay? Someone interpret that. A great wind is stirring up the sea. And you've seen the sea on television or in reality when you've been out on the water. When the wind stirs up the sea, okay, what's happening to the peoples? What's happening to the nations? What's happening to the lands when this great wind stirs up the sea? What would you think? It's going to be a change. It's going to be events. This great wind are the events in history. The events in history that cause the courses of nations to rise and to fall. Okay? This is very apocryphal language when you talk about the Great Sea. If you remember from your class in Revelation with Hiram, and I don't know if he ever brought this out. He and I talked about this at great length, and it was something he said that he had not noticed before. In the beginning of the book of Revelation, there's a great sea, right? By the end of Revelation, what happens to the sea? What happens to the sea by the end of the book of Revelation? It's no more. It gradually shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until the time when the sea is no more. So the nations are no more when Christ comes to judge. When God sends Jesus to judge, the nations will be no more, and everyone will be judged. So, if we look at this wind as those events in history, as the rise and fall of empires, and we see things like this in John 14. John 14 verses 30-31. We see this in Ephesians 6, and we also see this in Luke 4. So about these nations and about the wind. So we can set the tone for the chapter by talking about the fact that the winds of heaven are stirring up this great sea. There are things that are going to happen in history. There are going to be momentous events that have happened in history. And if you're a student of history, you can pinpoint a lot of these events as they happen through history, and that's what Daniel is doing here with this prophecy of what's to come. So in verse 2, Daniel says, I declared that I saw my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And out of the great sea came what? Four great beasts, okay? So now our goal is to talk about these four great beasts, one after the other in succession. Notice that there are four of them. They are great. They come up out of the sea, but they're what? What's the final thing that he says in verse 3? They're different from one another. Okay? So they're different from one another. So we get to the first one in verse 4. So many times, nations are portrayed as animals, right? Even today. What's the United States often portrayed as? An eagle. How about Russia? A bear. So you can think of a country, and so many times those countries are portrayed as animals. It's no different in the Old Testament. So about Egypt? What would Egypt be referred to as if it was an animal? Florida? Crocodile? Crocodile? I'm not a Florida fan. I'm sorry, I don't want to. But all of these nations came from the sea. They came from the Great Sea. Okay? And for the people of this time, what would the Great Sea be? What would the Great Sea be? You got to be a geography nut for this one. What is the Great Sea? It's long and it's wide. And it's Straits of Gibraltar and all the way through to Egypt above. Huh? Thank you very much. Mediterranean. If I was giving out gift cards, you'd get a gift card. All right, so even Egypt is portrayed as a crocodile in Ezekiel 29. So all of these beasts come up out of the sea. They're different from one another, though. So let's talk about the first one. Verse 4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Okay, and I had a really great picture of my PowerPoint that I didn't bring with me today of a statue standing outside of a palace that has the head of a man and has the feet and the legs of a lion, but it has wings. Anybody care to take a guess? What is the lion? The Babylonian Empire, okay? It's most often portrayed, if you look at pictures of, stylized pictures of Nebuchadnezzar, if you look at Ashurbanipal, if you look at many of the leaders of the Assyrian and the Babylonian Empire, they're often portrayed as having the head of a man, the body of a lion, and wings swept back, okay? So, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off. What does that mean? Okay, if it portrays the Babylonian Empire as this lion with wings, the wings are now plucked off. If you pluck the wings off something, what can it not do? Can't fly. It can't defend itself. Okay, so the wings are plucked off. What do the wings signify? What do the wings signify in terms of a country? If it has wings, it's considered to be what? It could be great expansion, but it could also be swiftness. Okay, if you look at an American bald eagle or some of the great raptors, some of those birds can fly at over 100 miles an hour. Some of them upwards of 150 miles an hour when they're in a steep descent to get their prey. So if anything with wings is considered very swift. It's a swift bird, especially if you've seen like a hummingbird. I mean, their wings are tremendous. So as I looked, its wings were plucked off. So the wings representing swiftness are plucked off. That means no more. It's not swift anymore. It's not conquering anymore. It's not moving the outer bounds of its kingdom anymore. It's stagnant. It becomes milder over time. Okay. And it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a mind of a man was given to it. So it became milder over time. The kingdom would diminish over time such that it would be taken over by another kingdom. It would be taken over by the next kingdom. And so verse 5 talks about another beast, the second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told to arise and devour much flesh. All right, who is this? What kingdom is this? The Medo-Persian Empire, okay? All right, so we have the Medo-Persian Empire. It's like a bear. The bear has a great appetite. It's raised up. When it's raised up, what is it preparing to do? When you see a bear in a movie and it's raised up, what's it getting ready to do? It's getting ready to attack. Except you've watched The Revenant, and then it didn't really raise up. It just kind of honed in on him and tore him up. What a great movie. Yeah. So it's like a bear, raised up on one side, 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. All right? 3 ribs in its mouth. What would those signify? Okay, it's not only going to signify the conquest, but it's going to signify the 3 great realms of the Medo-Persian Empire. And what were they? Okay, in the name itself are 2 of the 3. The Medes, which would have been the Babylonian, the Medes, the Persians, and the last one was Lydia. Okay, those are the 3 kingdoms of the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay. It says that the bear is told to arise and devour much flesh. What do you think? Do what? The Medo-Persians, they devoured much flesh, which is symbolic of, they did what? They conquered their kingdoms. And again, I had a great slide to show you how the expanse of the Babylonian Empire, and then the expanse of the Medo-Persian Empire, and then the ones to come get what? Get bigger and bigger as we go through time. Okay, and as you see this, as we go through this historical look at these kingdoms, you'll see that these kingdoms devour more flesh. They take more land. They conquer more peoples. Okay? Sorry? Their dominance increases as their westward and eastward expansion increases. That's correct. All right, so that's the bear, Medo-Persian Empire. Media, Persia, Lydia. They conquered more. They devoured much flesh. See how easy this is? Just know a little history. It comes right to your front door. All right, after this I looked, and behold, another beast like a leopard. Now, your version may say panther. It's either one of the 2. It can be. Another like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. All right, so we've got a leopard, but this leopard is not your typical leopard. This leopard has what? It has 4 heads, 4 wings. Okay, so the 4 wings, if they denote swiftness, if it has 4 wings, what do you get from that? It's much swifter. It's going to conquer more. It's going to devour more flesh. It's going to take over more land. All right? Who does this represent? This represents the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. Okay? His father, Philip of Macedonia, began a conquest, and his son Alexander the Great took over and conquered most of the known world. Most of the known world. All right? So then 4 wings represents the speed of the conquest of Alexander the Great as he moves through. And when he dies at the tender age of how old? How old was Alexander the Great when he died? Ooh, you really got to dig down deep for this one. I can't remember either. I think he was 29. I believe he was 29 when he died. So when he died, he did what? It was broken up into 4 kingdoms. Broken up into 4 kingdoms. He left his empire to his 4 generals, and they were called the Didachi. That's Diadochi, the Diachi. And that word means successors. These are the successors to Alexander the Great's empire. And there are 4 of them, 4 heads. Let's first, I know you won't know the names of the men that were left, but how about the kingdoms? What were the 4 kingdoms? Over the 4 kingdoms. Well, first of all, there was Greece, okay? And who got that? Anybody? Real students of history? No? Okay. Cassander was the general that was left in charge of Greece, okay? He got Greece. What's another one? This one should be easy. Yeah, Asia Minor, Southwest Asia. I mean, that's what everybody calls it, Southwest Asia, and that's the area of modern day. That's going to be more Babylon, that area down in Southwest Asia, and that was left to Seleucus. Okay, the easiest one of the 4 is Egypt. Now, who was left in charge in Egypt? Who was put in charge of Egypt? Ptolemy. Ptolemy the first. And his reign went right through someone very famous that everybody knows, the woman Cleopatra. Okay? This is all descendant from Ptolemy the first down through the Egyptian line of succession all the way down to Cleopatra, although she's not in this. That's just a fact. So, and then there's one area, unless you really were really into history, Phrygia, and Antigonus was the one that was left to that. And he was actually a satrap. You remember in the narratives that we talked about, the satraps were called together by Nebuchadnezzar and by Belshazzar and all those people. A satrap is a governor, and so he was left in charge of Phrygia. So we have Antigonus. Antigonus is Phrygia, Cassander is Greece, Ptolemy is Egypt, and Seleucus is the Southwest Asia, is the Southwest Asia group. So that's the four. That's the four heads. And then the four wings represent that swiftness of conquering that Alexander the Great. He conquered more. Go and read a biography of Alexander the Great. He conquered more land in a swifter time than most any conqueror in history. If you've ever heard the term crossing the Rubicon, okay, I've used that term on. Once you've crossed the Rubicon, what does that mean in modern parlance? When you say, I've crossed the Rubicon, what does that mean? Lowell? You don't? You can't go back. You've crossed the Rubicon. When Alexander the Great crossed the Alps with the elephants, there was no way for him to be able to go back. Yeah, you've thrown your hat out. Okay, that's more cowboy parlance than anything. So. All right, so we've gotten that one taken care of. So I looked, and behold, another beast like a leopard, 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So that's the Alexander the Great piece of this. All right, verse 7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying, dreadful, exceedingly strong, teeth of iron, feet of bronze. It devoured and broke into pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. It's a terrible animal. It's strong. It has iron teeth. Rome. Now, from within this, it has 10 horns. 10 horns represent what? 10 rulers, 10 rulers. We don't know necessarily that they were 10 emperors, but it very well could be, but this is the early stages of the Roman Empire when it came and began its conquest. So it's the Roman Empire. And so Daniel says, I considered the horns. I considered the 10 horns. And behold, there came up from among them another horn, a little one. So this is a little horn. And what do we know about this? What do we know about this little horn? Before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. That means they were plucked up by the roots and they're gone. And behold, in this horn, the little horn, were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. All right? So we're going to leave that. We're going to leave that sitting there because Daniel's going to come back to that. So just imagine now, it's 10 horns in this great beast. 10 of them come up. 3 of them are plucked out, and there's a little horn that comes up that's not as great as the 10 horns, but it's described as a little horn. It has the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great things. All right. So then Daniel switches the scenes completely. So now you have these all described for you. Now he's going to go into a discussion in verses 9 through 12 of the Ancient of Days. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Clothing was white as snow. Hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. So the Ancient of Days appears, and we've all agreed that this is who? This is God. God appears. He appears in all of his great might. He appears to bring judgment against the four beasts and to the little horn. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were open. This sounds eerily reminiscent of another book, the book of Revelation. This is not the final judgment. This is the judgment against the four kings, against the four beasts. Okay? This is the judgment against the four beasts. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. So all of this time that the Ancient of Days is coming to his throne, this little horn continues to speak. And as I looked, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and for a time. So the rest of the beasts had their dominion taken away, but it says that their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. What does that indicate? What does that indicate? These kingdoms they weren't destroyed entirely, but they were taken over, they were assumed by another, yet their culture and the things that were a part of those kingdoms remained. Okay? So, thrones were smashed flat, coming in judgment. White hair, the Ancient of Days appears with white hair and a garment, symbolizing what? Purity. Okay, symbolizing purity. His flaming throne indicates what? It's the seat of what's going to happen. It's the seat of judgment. The judgment is going to happen. And his judgment moves from kingdom to kingdom, from place to place, thus the fiery wheels. The wheels indicate that the judgment is taking place from place to place, from kingdom to kingdom. His judgment is taking place. All right? So in verse 10, it says that a stream of fire issued and came out from before him. Any ideas? He's now pronouncing what? His judgment. He's pronouncing his judgment on the four beasts. Okay? And then we have thousands. We have thousands. You do the math. 1,000 thousands and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And they stood before him in the court of judgment. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. Judgment in this case, with the books being opened, were to remind everyone there that they're standing in judgment, just as in the book of Revelation. What happens to the books? The books are opened, and what proceeds after the books are opened? Men are judged. You'll be judged. What you've done in this life is being written in a book. And you will have to answer when you stand before God, when he judges you. And so the books are opened. The judgment is always swift and always sure. So with the Ancient of Days in control, all of these kingdoms still exist in some form or another, but all reduced, all diminished when the fourth one is destroyed. All right. I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed and his body destroyed and was given over to be burned. Again, the dominion was taken away, lives prolonged for a second time. Now we have a third character that enters the picture here. We have the four beasts, we have the Ancient of Days, and now we have verse 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like the Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. All right, what are we talking about here? The Ancient of Days. Now a third character appears, like unto the Son of Man. Jesus Christ, right. When you read this, I saw in the vision, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like unto the Son of Man. How is Jesus going to return? How is he going to return? He's going to come with the clouds, isn't he? He's going to come with the clouds in judgment. How did he leave in Acts 1, verse 9? He left in the clouds and took his seat at the right hand of God. And when he took that seat, he's establishing a kingdom of which there would be no end, a kingdom which will never be destroyed, which will have dominion forever and ever. And that is what? It's the church. It's the church. So I saw in the night vision, behold, with the clouds of heaven came one like unto the Son of Man. He sees Christ returning. He sees the return of Christ. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented to him. In fact, he sees Christ ascending in Acts 1, verse 9. He sees him ascending, and he's presenting himself before God as the crucified Savior, as the Savior of the world. And he presents himself to God, and God gives him this kingdom, which is the church. Okay? Questions or comments at this point before we go into the interpretation? And let's just put something on the top of the cherry on the top of the sundae here for verses 13 and 14. So this vision of Christ that he sees is comparative to Acts 1, verse 9. This is where Christ descends back into heaven. The Ancient of Days honors Christ in verse 14 by giving him the dominion. What did Jesus say in Matthew 28:19? What? Some power is given to me. A little power is given to me, right? No. All power, all authority. All authority is given to me. Jesus has all the power. Jesus has all the glory. John 17, verse 5. It is his kingdom, Colossians 1, verse 13. All nations and all peoples will serve him, Philippians 2, verses 9 through 11. 2 Peter 1, verse 11, that kingdom will never pass away. That kingdom will never be destroyed. Hebrews 12:28 says that kingdom will never be shaken. The church will never be destroyed. The church will never be shaken. The church will be his till he returns and takes those of his family back to heaven with him. So there's a lot of New Testament in 13 and 14. There's a lot that is included in those two short verses. All right. Now the interpretation. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there. Who did he approach? Who would you guess he approaches? It doesn't come right out and say it, but who would you think he approaches? No, he probably approaches, the way this is written, he probably approaches one of the angels. It's a he. So he approaches one of these, he approaches one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all of this. And so this person had some knowledge, whoever this was, if it was an angel. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. It doesn't say that he approached the Son of Man. It does not say he approached the Ancient of Days. He said he approached one that stood there, one of those thousands, 10,000, 10,000s. Does it say an angel in your version? Does anyone else? What version is that? In IV? I don't have that in mine. Let me see if it says something. Let me see if that says something. I'm curious about that because approach one. No, I don't have a reference to anything on that verse, and I usually have references for all that. So he approaches one of those who stood there, and he asked him for the truth concerning this. So whoever was standing there knew what the interpretation was, made known to me the interpretation of the kings. Okay, so we go through these. The four beasts were the four kings who shall arise out of the earth. The saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with teeth of iron. And now he adds in an item we hadn't seen before. This was not in the first section of this. Not only was the teeth of, not only did it have teeth of iron, but now it has claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And he inquired about the 10 horns that were on the head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell, and this horn had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. So he's troubled by this vision. He does not know the meaning. And so whether he goes to one of those in the crowd, which it says, or he goes to an angel, he asks that angel to impart the truth, to impart the interpretation to him of this vision. And so we talk about 4 kingdoms. In verse 18, the saints of the Most High shall possess the kingdom forever and ever and ever. And so, again, this harkens back to Matthew 5:5 in the Beatitudes. The meek shall do what? The meek shall inherit the earth. Revelation 3:21, it says, if you overcome in this life, you can come over to be with God. And that's really the substance of the whole book of Revelation. If you overcome, you can come over. Okay? The saints control the kingdom. The saints are the church is controlled by the saints on earth. They're the ones who control the kingdom, according to Revelation 2:26. Okay? Now, the 4th beast is very unusual, and we added to that it has not only the teeth of iron, but claws of bronze, which devour it. So we're left with the little horn. And in verse 21, it says, as I looked, the horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. It made war with the saints. The little horn makes war with the people of God, and it prevails. It prevailed until the Ancient of Days comes in verse 22. It prevails until the Ancient of Day comes, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. In other words, the church, the saints are now possessing the church that Jesus left to them. Thus he says, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, break it into pieces. And he's talking about Rome, the 4th beast. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So we're talking about 10 kings. We're talking about 10 horns that represent 10 kings as a group. They represent the power of Rome through the different emperors. No particular one emperor is named, but we know that the 4th beast is Rome. And so the little horn comes out from among those, and then 3 kings are done away with, and a portion of that power is taken away. This individual, this horn that has the eyes of a man, or that has the eyes and the mouth of a man, speaks great swelling words. He speaks against the Most High. He speaks against the Most High. He's slanderous. His damage is by talking, and he changes the times and the laws, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a time. And so as Daniel ends this, Daniel is very troubled. The kingdom and the dominion of the greatness of the kingdom unto the whole world shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. So this little horn that comes up and speaks great swelling words, that speaks slanderous things against the people of God, there is a litany of different scholars who say different things about this. The predominant view among Christian scholars is that this represents Rome. Not only does it represent Rome, but it represents the papacy. This is the coming of the papacy. Daniel is troubled by this. Constantine instituted the papacy. It eventually took control over Rome. Its power was talked about. It persecuted the saints, but God preserved the saints. God has preserved the church down through time. And Daniel says, here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept this matter in my heart. So, right. And there's a wide variety of things. Some people use this as a pivot to say that Christ is coming back to establish an earthly kingdom. which we know is not going to happen because he's not going to touch foot on this earth ever again. So four lessons from this as we conclude this lesson. 4 lessons. Number 1, again, God rules in the kingdom of men. Daniel 4:27, Daniel 5:21. Second lesson, God will judge. Evil in the end will fall to the judgment. Evil will fall to the judgment of a righteous God. Jesus is the fulfillment of all things. Number 3, Philippians 2, verses 9 through 11. The saints will be persecuted. All those who live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. Revelation 1:9 says that persecution will happen. Daniel 7:25 says persecution will happen. And then again, 2 Timothy 3:12 tells us that persecution will come to the righteous. So those are the 4 lessons from chapter 7. So, as we step back and take a look at this, Daniel has this vision of things that will happen many millennia after he is long gone. But he begins to see these things as they begin to unfold over the pages of history, and while he is a part of the history, he's not privy to a lot of the interpretation, except that he sees these things in a very wide world view about what's going to happen. Next week, we continue the prophecy and interpretation. Next week is Daniel's vision of the ram and of the goat, and that does not mean the greatest of all time. It's a goat. So the ram and the goat. So next week, Lord willing, we'll be here and we'll take on chapter 8. Thank you for your time.